Hello everyone, welcome to Pete CD Vinyl World. Today I was going to do something that I was planning on doing for a while and finally got around to it and listened to them all again. So that's going to be ranking the Iron Maiden albums through the Final Frontier. And the reason I'm doing it just through the Final Frontier is their last two albums, Book of Souls and Senjutsu, they're double concept albums, and to me, they don't necessarily fit into the rest of their catalog. I've listened to them, and I'll tell you where I will fit them in my ranking. But overall, they're not my favorite. The direction they've gone. A lot of people say they're more prog now, or I guess they've moved in a more epic direction. Like their albums now have several 10, 12-minute songs as opposed to just one on each album. But again, I'll let you know where I fit them in. So Iron Maiden, I became aware of them probably the early days of MTV, like really early days, where they would show like Number of the Beast video. They possibly may have had another one from that album. And clearly remember Flight of Icarus. Then a few years later, once Power Slave came out, I believe they showed the Live After Death concert one Halloween night. I think it was 1985 or so. And that's when I really became aware of them and a big fan of theirs. So I've been a big fan of theirs ever since. I've seen them. First time I saw them actually was on the X Factor tour in a small club in New Jersey called the Birch Hill Nightclub. Really good. I then saw them at Madison Square Garden where they returned with Bruce Dickinson on the Brave New World tour, and I've seen them a couple times since then. Probably the best time was, I'm not sure what the tour was called, but they had basically the Power Slave tour stage, and it was mostly songs from that era. I forgot what that tour was called, but I don't know, it's probably the best time I saw them. Anyway, so you might be surprised at some of my rankings, but I'm going to get started with Matter of Life and Death. So this is, I think, the third album they've done since Bruce Dickinson returned. Not really a huge fan of this one. They have a lot of sort of drawn out, not melodic songs on here. These Colors Don't Run, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, they're pretty good. Reincarnation of Benjamin Brieg, but it's almost like this album is just made up of songs on other albums that would have been like the worst songs on there. So and it's a made up of 12 tracks on here, or 10 tracks that basically cover that. So that's why I'm ranking it last. It's never one that I'm think to put on and listen to. I actually saw them on this tour, and this is the tour that everyone notoriously talks about, where they played this entire album front to finish, and then they played like 5 other songs. And of course, one of those songs was Fear of the Dark, which they seem to not be able to get rid of, but they only did it in a few cities in the U.S., and it was actually in New Jersey where they played one of those concerts. So that's my lowest ranking. Next up, I'm going to rank the X Factor. I'm sorry, that's not right. Next up, I'm going to rank the Final Frontier. So this was the last album they did. That's sort of what I call like a normal studio album, 10 tracks. A lot of people rank this as their worst one, but I think it's actually pretty decent as far as the melodies. Yeah, some of the stuff is sort of, at this point they're really getting redundant with their musical intros and structure of the songs. I think this is the album where, if you listen to this album and the last two, a song starts playing and, it could be any number of songs on that album, and you would have to be hard pressed to give me the name of the song until you get to the chorus or whatever. And that sort of starts on here. And a little bit even on the X Factor, where a lot of the songs have these long, drawn out intros that are not really memorable and don't really go anywhere. But this one's got some good melody to it. And the only thing about these later albums from, say, Dance of Death on, where Bruce is starting to hit the high notes and he's doing like this yelping thing instead of just sort of avoiding it. That's the only thing that bothers me about these later albums, I would say. And I really find from Dance of Death on, the absence of Adrian Smith, the more melodic, songwriting. I know he co-writes a lot of these songs, but sort of when he joined, he's the one that brought that melodic sense to the Iron Maiden that really was there through, Brave New World, except the albums he didn't play on. Even those albums sort of have his presence on there, but that was the next one. And sort of now is where I would put in Senjutsu and Book of Souls. Just because the reasons I said, not that they're not good, but overly long songs that don't really go anywhere. These endless long intros with just bass and acoustic guitar, and it's all the same. I mean, you can't distinguish one song from another at this point. Not that they're bad, but I don't mind when a band has like one or two really long tracks. But their last one, Senjutsu, I think the second disc or second album, it's 3 or 4 just 12-minute songs. So that's why I'm not a big fan of those. A lot of people say, well, they're prog metal now. It's not even like it's prog. I don't mind long songs, but have some melody. And when I listen to like Rime of the Ancient Mariner or some of the other longer songs, even the song Power Slave, which is fairly long, you're anticipating the next moments. These other songs, you're just waiting for them to end, really. So that's why I'm going to put them there. Next up, the X Factor. As I listen to the 2 Blaze Bayley albums now, I don't think they're as bad as everyone says. What's lacking in this one is the production. It actually, oddly enough, sounds like the same guy who produced Van Halen 3 produced this. There's just no sort of echo and bombast to anything. Iron Maiden was always one of those bands on their studio albums that sort of sounded like larger than life, and this doesn't have that at all. Definitely some slower tracks on here. Like I said, this is sort of the beginning of that, even though I'll talk about Virtual 11 later. But, Sign of the Cross is pretty good. Lord of the Flies, Man on the Edge is pretty good. Man on the Edge was this upbeat, really fast rocker, kind of classic Iron Maiden. So that was released first as a single. When everyone first heard that, they were like, oh, cool, this is going to be good. But then that's the only one that's really like that. There are other parts of songs that get into that double time solo sections and stuff like that. But overall, I think it's better than people remember it. But it's a long, tedious listen. Put it that way. It's a good album to put on while you're working, this and that, but it's not something you're going to put on. And next up would be the next album with Blaze Bayley on vocals, Virtual 11. I think this one's much better. This is another album where people rank this as their lowest, but I actually think it's pretty good. Future Real, Angel and the Gambler, Lightning Strikes Twice, The Klansman. Bruce even sang The Klansman for a couple of tours, along with Sign of the Cross from the other one. But this one's much better in terms of just sounding like an Iron Maiden album. And just having some like up-tempo, fast stuff on here. That's why I like this one much better. And the production's way better too. Next up is follow-up to Brave New World. That's Dance of Death. And to me personally, this is probably their last like really good album. Wildest Dreams, No More Lies, Monsignor, Dance of Death. Passchendaele. Passchendaele is one of their best songs in the last 20 years or so. Journeyman. And this, like I said earlier, this is probably one of the last albums that I really hear Adrian Smith's like melodic sense to the songs. A lot of people complain about the cover. It's terrible early computer graphics. I guess I think it's almost meant to look like that. It's meant to look bad. Because the illustration in the middle is pretty cool, but the rest of it is just terrible. So, next up is the first one without Adrian Smith, No Prayer for the Dying. Again, this is an album now that people listen to and sort of think it's worse than they remember, and it's actually a pretty good album. They went from Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, which is sort of like their most proggiest album, and overproduced keyboards, to a more garagey sounding album, closer to their first album, I would say, as far as like sense of songs. Adrian Smith did write Hooks in You, which is pretty good as well. Taylor Gunner, Holy Smoke, No Prayer for the Dying. It's all pretty good songs on here. Mother Russia is the long epic on here. A lot of people want them to play it live. I never thought it was that great of a song to begin with. So I would say like half the album is like really good. The other half is just okay, but nothing bad. This is the first one with Yannick Gers. And really, I don't think he really gelled with Dave Murray as much as Adrian Smith. Except for the X Factor. I think they do a lot of good melodic solos and stuff on that album. Why it took them a couple albums to get into that, I don't know. But what I have a problem with them now is there's the three guitar players. Yannick stayed on board when Adrian Smith rejoined. But Adrian Smith now is just regulated to being like the third guitar player. And that harmony guitar and the stuff that they used to do didn't return with him and Dave Murray when he came back, so it's kind of odd. And even in concert, like the songs that Yannick Gers had played the solo on that were Adrian's, he still plays them now. Like Adrian Smith came back and he's still playing the solos that he did say on, I don't know what song in particular, but just say like 2 Minutes to Midnight or whatever, so he's still playing the solos. I don't really get why they do that, but anyway, it's better than people remember, I think. Next up, and slightly better, I think, is the one after that, Fear of the Dark. Fear of the Dark to me, is like their most overplayed song. They've played that song in concert ever since that album was released, and it's just a bore fest as far as I'm concerned. Be Quicker to Be Dead, pretty good opener. I remember that was the first single. I think overall this has a few more better songs than the last one. From Here to Eternity, Afraid to Shoot Strangers. Wasting Love was their first real, I would say, ballad that was about love, and probably only, and it's not that great. Judas Be My God was pretty good, and then Weekend Warrior is a sort of a rockier, garagey type sound that would have fit in on No Prayer for the Dying, but that's actually one of the better songs on here, I think. And Fear of the Dark, of course. So, yeah, this one's pretty solid as well. Was this the one? Yeah, I think this is the last one produced by Martin Birch, if I'm not mistaken. Then Bruce leaves after this tour. Next up, Brave New World, the one that Bruce Dickinson returned on. Now they're being produced by Kevin Shirley, who I guess best known for producing Dream Theater, I would say. Wicker Man, Ghost of Navigator, Brave New World. Blood Brothers is a really great song. So like every song on here is really good. To me, what's funny about this is a lot of bands get back together with either their original singer or guitar player, and they sort of try to get back to their original sound and blah, blah, blah. They did something cool where this, to me, sounds like the next logical follow-up to Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. So if you had erased, the 4 albums they made in between, this sounds like perfectly in line, which would be the next album to Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. Still some keyboards on here, but, Yannick Gers is on here, but to me, I think Adrian Smith, since he came back, also has a big presence on this album. But yeah, this is a pretty good album, I would say. Their last, like I said, Dance of Death's probably the last really good album. This is probably the last great album, I would say. Next up, and a lot of people rank this as one of their favorites, and that's Somewhere in Time. How could you rank this above, say, the first, 5 or so? But still, Caught Somewhere in Time, Wasted Years, Sea of Madness, Heaven Can Wait. The second side, Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, and Alexander the Great, to me, are long and sort of weaker tracks. This is why I rank it on the lower side, but I definitely remember when this came out, hearing Wasted Years. Wasted Years is definitely my favorite Iron Maiden song, period. Probably a top 10 song for me all time from any band. So it's a great one. Next up, I can't believe I'm ranking it this low, because if you ask me what my favorites are, I'll probably say the first two, but you sort of weigh the thing when you're ranking the albums as far as quality goes. So it's the debut. It's awesome from start to finish. Prowler, Remember Tomorrow, Running Free, Phantom of the Opera, Strange World, Sanctuary. Can't go wrong with this album at all. Big fan of the first two. Next up, Power Slave. Another one where people rank it as their favorite. And the first side, yeah, I definitely think is killer, as well as the second. But there are a couple of, I would say, weaker tracks. The instrumental, Lost for Words. The Duelist is okay. Flash of the Blade is pretty good. Back to the Village. Don't think they ever played that live. Of course, Power Slave and Rime of the Ancient Mountain. Power Slave is another one, and Aces High, my favorite Iron Maiden songs. So. Next up, slightly edging out that one, is Peace of Mind for me. And the only reason is that there's a couple of Quest for Fire and To Tame a Land. Those two songs I'm not really crazy about. The rest of them are just killer from start to finish. Where Eagles Dare, Revelations, Flight of Icarus, The Trooper, Still Life. So we're into the top 4 now, I could say. Coming in next, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. And I've seen people rank the rest of these, even the top 6 I have, as their number 1. I know it's supposed to be a concept album. It's definitely not a rock opera, I would say. I don't really think there's a cohesive storyline. It's more of a loose concept. But Moonchild is one of my favorite songs from them, as well as Bruce Dickinson, Evil That Men Do, The Prophecy, Clairvoyant, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. So this was Adrian Smith's last album before he left. And the funny thing is, he wanted to continue in this style. And Iron Maiden, I guess, wanted to not take it easy, but they just wanted to put out a regular rockier album, garagey, as they say. So he didn't want to go in that direction. The odd thing is that everything that Adrian Smith has done since this album, including the stuff outside of Iron Maiden right now, like the Smith and Kotzen albums, are all garagey sounding albums. So, why didn't you just stay in Iron Maiden and do that? And then he did rejoin Bruce's band for his last couple albums. Those are pretty good as well. Again, number 3 overall, probably with the first one are my favorites, but not ranked that high when I'm just ranking them. It's Killers, first one with Adrian Smith, Wrathchild, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Another Life. Every song on here is just, I would say, a minor hit or well-known song in the Iron Maiden catalog as far as even their fans go. On the Number of the Beast tour, Bruce even sang a number of these songs, like Another Life and Purgatory, I believe, or Twilight Zone, Killers, Murders in the Rue Morgue. So they were doing like, on their first couple of tours, they were doing like about 4 songs from this, even with Bruce. And number 1, of course, Number of the Beast. You can't deny how good this album is. Every song is killer on here, and probably one of their bigger hits, except Gangland, which is not that great. Invaders is a lesser known song too, but that's a really cool opener. There's another song that was a B-side called Total Eclipse, and they put it on some CD editions. It's actually, they played it live too on that famous Hammersmith concert from this tour. To me, this album, there's some of the songs I can picture or hear Paul Di'Anno doing. So that's why I think this album's sort of cool, because it's sort of a transition. A lot of people think they just went full steam ahead with this album and it was Bruce Dickinson all the way. But there's some stuff on here I could hear Paul Di'Anno singing, like 22 Acacia Avenue or Children of the Damned or Invaders. The second side, Number of the Beast, Run to the Hills, Hallelujah. I mean, to me, those are definitely more Bruce-ish songs, but I definitely can hear some Paul Di'Anno singing some of these. So that's my ranking. Of course, my favorite Iron Maiden album of all time is Live After Death. It's my favorite live album of all time, but it's not one of their studio albums. Just the sound of this album and being a fan of theirs at the time, you can't beat this album at all. And Made in Japan was their EP with Paul Di'Anno. That's another great one. So another thing that Iron Maiden is known for, of course, is putting out their B-sides on 12-inch singles. So I'll show you some of them that I have. I don't have all of them, but I do have some. So Women in Uniform, which is a non-album single and has Drifter Live, Phantom of the Opera Live. 2 Minutes to Midnight. I forgot what this has on it. Rainbow's Gold. This was an EP. They came out at the same time as Live After Death. And it's got 3 extra tracks. A different version of Running Free, Sanctuary, and Murders in the Rue Morgue with Bruce on vocals. I think this is a Wicker Man picture disc. It's Wasted Years with Sheriff of Huddersfield and Reach Out, which is a song that Adrian Smith sung. This is the first appearance they did. It was the Metal from Mothers compilation album. It's got some new wave of British heavy metal bands on here, and it has Sanctuary and Wrathchild, which I think are different versions early versions that ended up differently than what was on the albums they came on. And they put out a ton of live albums since. I don't have all of those, but some of them I do have are Live at Donington. This one, actually, Adrian Smith comes back on for the encores, I believe, and he had just left a couple years ago. And then after Bruce left, they put out these 2 live albums, a real dead one and a real live one. So, which is pretty cool, because the one, a real dead one, has all older songs from the first album through, like, I guess first album through, like, Live After Death era. And this one has songs from, say, like Somewhere in Time through Fear of the Dark, which was their newest one at the time. So they sort of broke it up into 2 different albums, because all the tracks are from like different cities. So they must have done a bunch of different tracks at different cities on this tour. They even do Prowler on here with Bruce, and Where Eagles Dare, because that was never on a live album either. So that's it. There you have it. So if you like these videos, please subscribe and give me your top 5 or 10 Iron Maiden albums. Thanks a lot.